Well, this evening we're going to be back with Abraham, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to do a little bit, just sort of a survey, a little bit of chapter 20 and chapter 21. I want to dig more into chapter 22 this evening, a very important chapter of the book of Genesis, and I just want to mention some key events in 20 and 21. And so let's first of all look in chapter 20. And some say this is sort of Abraham slipping back into an old practice. This is where he went to journeyed again and went into a place. It says Abram journeyed from thence towards south country and dwelled between Kadesh and Shur and sojourned in Gerar. And Abraham said to his wife, Sarah his wife, "She is my sister." And Abimelech king of Gerar sent and took Sarah. This is the same old thing that happened, remember, when he went to Egypt. And he tells the Egyptian, the Pharaoh down there, that this is my sister. And you see, this is one of those things where Abraham is telling a little bit of a half-truth, because actually Sarah's his half-sister. Now, I know that seems odd in our day, but they had the same father but different mothers. Now, the problem is this, yes, she was a half-sister, but she was his wife. and so he was afraid at this point again that, well, this guy was going to be wicked and steal his wife from him. And so this is a little bit of a problem here. It gets him in trouble. He didn't really learn his lesson because it got him in trouble back down in Egypt. And it gets him some trouble today, and God intervened and actually and told Abimelech that that wasn't the truth. And I think the key is this, a little bit further down in the chapter, there's a statement I want us to read, and why he did this. This is why Abraham did what he did, okay? And Abraham said, "Because I thought surely the fear of God is not in this place, and they will slay me for my wife's sake." Now that was his reasoning for doing this. Now the problem is, it was just like the first time, Abraham at this point was still failing just to trust God with his circumstance. Okay, anytime that you do something that's not in the line of truth in order to protect what you don't think God can do, you always will get in trouble. And God, and he should have just said, this is my wife, and he should have just relied on God. He had the promises of God about this situation. God told him that they were going to have a child, they were going to be blessed, and all these things. So it wasn't like Abraham was not going to get knocked off the scene. He had the promises of God that his life was going to go on, that they were going to have a child, and they would be blessed for many years to come. So he had that promise. But at that point, he had a little trouble with that promise. But anyway, it got him in trouble again. And that's chapter 20, doing the same old sin again and getting the same old consequence again. You know what? If you keep doing the same old sin again, the consequences and outcomes is not going to change. Some people keep thinking, well, I'm going to do it this time, but the outcome's going to be different. No different. It's the same old outcome, the same old way. So that's what we learned. Now, chapter 21, I want to give a key thought on that. This is the long-awaited birth of Isaac. Okay, now this is something that Abraham has been promised for 25 years. You're going to have a son. You're going to have a son. It's been hard for him to grasp how that God was going to do that and use it through Sarah. And so the Lord visits Sarah, and he said, and the Lord said to Sarah, as he had spoken, for Sarah conceived and bare Abraham a son in his old age, at the set time of which God had spoken of him. And Abraham called the name of the son that was born to him, whom Sarah bare to him, Isaac. Okay, so this is the story of Isaac. And then it talks about there in verse 21, Isaac actually means laughter. And Sarah said, God hath made me to laugh, so that all that hear will laugh with me. And so this little baby brought a lot of laughter and joy to the home, and it brought a lot of people laughing, seeing old Abraham and Sarah having this little baby at 90 and 100, and people, you tell the story today, and people still laugh. So that's a good name for old Isaac. And with Joseph and I was talking before we started here today, that old Isaac, God spent a long time talking about Isaac coming. Isaac's coming. Isaac coming. And then he came and then spent a long time with Isaac and then moved right on. So Isaac doesn't get a lot of space in the Bible. Isaac is one of these guys, is sort of like, well, he's the son of Abraham and the father of Jacob. He had a very famous father and a very famous son, and Isaac was right in the middle. Very important Bible character, but he doesn't have all the stuff around him that Abraham did and Jacob did. But very important. You couldn't have got to Jacob without Isaac. And so we see this thing cropping up again. I highlighted this passage here because after he was born, there was a party being thrown, and man, could you imagine that was a great party that day, waiting for this long-awaited son. And here comes this thing creeping up again that was the result of the Egypt trip, the Hagar and Ishmael. Now, Ishmael was a teenager by this time. I think most people, I think he's about 14 time Isaac is born. And let me see, this is getting ahead of myself a little bit further. It talks about the story. And basically, Hagar and Ishmael was sort of mocking old Isaac. The old baby come. Oh, look at that old baby there. Look at that baby. They think he's so great. And they were mocking him. Well, you mock a baby, and old Mama Sarah didn't take too well to that. And Sarah told Abraham, said, we got to get rid of Hagar right now. And so for the second time, Hagar got locked out of the house. Remember, she got kicked out of the house when she was with child there earlier with the little baby Ishmael. And now all these years later, now Isaac is born. And so Hagar gets knocked out of the house again. And this time, they give her a piece of bread and a bottle of water and head her out in the desert. That didn't last too long. And they're about to die, the story tells us. And basically, the story tells, I'm not reading all these verses, but you can read the context here too, that she sits down and basically sends the little boy over, the teenage boy, not a little boy, over one way. She goes, she just can't bear what, we're going to die. We're going to die. We don't have enough water, we don't have enough food, and we're going to suffer and die. That was what she thought. Well, anyway, God heard the voice of the lad. That's what's in verse 17. And the angel of God called to Hagar out of heaven and said unto her, What aileth thee, Hagar? Fear not, for God hath heard the voice of the lad where he is. Now God here was very merciful to Hagar and Ishmael because it wasn't their fault. It was Abraham's doing that brought Hagar out of Egypt. It was Abraham's doing that there was a child born. It wasn't that Hagar did not ask to be in this situation, and God had mercy. Now Ishmael was going to be a thorn in the flesh of his people for many generations, and still are today, because they take different sides of the issues over there on the land and everything. But God was merciful to this woman here. God loved Hagar, and God loved Ishmael. And he basically said, I'm going to make a great nation out of Ishmael. And he became the father, basically, the Arab nations. And God basically showed them an oasis to where they could go to and have water and food. And then later on, they settled in another part of the land. And that's how they grew up in their families. And then, it was separate from Isaac and Abraham and their family. But that was just an interesting story there a little bit in chapter 21. You see the birth of Isaac, a big party, and then you see Abraham basically kicking out Hagar again and Ishmael. And so that's a tragic story in the midst of all that, isn't it? How when we do something out of God's will, you just don't get away from it. Just don't get away from it. All these things are sort of attached to you, and that's what happened to Abraham. Abraham is a great man, and we're going to see in this next chapter one of the greatest acts of faith ever recorded. And let's go to that because I bring this up because Abraham wasn't perfect. He had made some mistakes in the past, but he was also growing in his faith to trust God. He was on a journey of faith. God took him on a geographical journey one time, took him all the way from Ur and all the way down to Canaan. That was but he took a spiritual journey too. And that was many years in the making. But most of us can say the same thing. if you've been saved, you've been on a spiritual journey. And there's things that you've learned. There's things as a Christian that you've learned. There's things that you've made mistakes at, and they still hinder you today. They still hound you today. They still bite at your heels today, don't they? But you don't throw in the towel. You just you just go on, and you grow. And this next chapter is an amazing chapter, a wonderful chapter of the Bible, chapter 22. This is a story of when God put Abraham to the test on his loyalty and who he loved. Okay? And the first verse says, "And it came to pass after those things that God did tempt Abraham." Now, this is not a tempting to sin. God doesn't tempt to sin. Remember, sometimes tempt, just like it is used in the New Testament, it also has the idea of test. And the context will tell you whether it's an enticement to sin or a trial to purge, to prune, and to test. Okay, that's what it is. Satan tempts to see you fail. He entices you to sin to fail. God tempts or tests to see you pass. The motive of God is growth and maturity. The motive of Satan is destruction. And so this was something here that God was allowing and God was involved with to test his faith. And what he was going to do, he got to tempt Abram and said unto him, Abram, and he said, "Behold, here I am." He said, "Take now thy son, thy only son Isaac." Now notice he said thy only son. Did he have more than one son? He did. He had another son called Ishmael. But in God's eyes, the real son for the promise was Isaac. And that's sort of like, it has the idea, in the New Testament, the Bible says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son." The idea of begotten was that unique son, because spiritually, we're all come to know Christ. We're the sons of God, but we're not the unique son of God. We're not Jesus. And I think about this. Isaac was the unique son, this promised son, this one who was very much the plan of God. So he said, "You take this son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moria, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I will tell you of." Did you get that, what he said? I want you to take your son, the one that you waited for 25 years, the one who I said I'm going to bless you, and your seeds will become as multiple as the stars, as many as the grains of sand. I want you to take him up Mount Moriah. I want you to kill him. Mount Moriah is a place that is, most people of Bible studies and scholars would tell you it's right in the Jerusalem area. And many believe Mount Moriah may be even Mount Calvary, Golgotha Hill. Very well could have been the same place. And I, because this was, and I think it probably is, because God did this for a great picture, a type of Christ dying for us. There's so many similarities here of Isaac, of Abraham, the type of the father, and Isaac, a type of the son. And so he tells us, now you got to remember now, I know this story, Isaac is not a baby. He's not ripping, little baby out of the arm of Sarah and saying, "I've got to take your son with me up to this mountain." No, that wasn't anything. He was a son. He was 16, maybe 17 years old, a boy that was be stronger than his 115-year-old father. And he says, this is what I'm going to do. At this point, when he got ready for the sacrifice, Isaac could have beat his dad off. Abraham didn't. He's not going to call a whole group of his trained men in here to tie him up and put him on there. Let's go down the story here as you see this. And he rose early and he took to the mountains. I'm just going down through a little bit. And Abraham, let me go over verse number 5. That's a good verse to hit there. So Abraham said to the young men, there was a group of people went with him on this journey. And Abraham said to this young man, "Abide ye here with this ass, this donkey, and I and the lad, Isaac, will go yonder and worship." Notice that, go yonder and worship. This was a thing of worship here. "And come again to you." Come again to. The idea is we're going to come back. Okay? And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it upon Isaac his son. Oh, what a picture that is. You remember Jesus, what did they lay on him when he went to the they laid the cross on him, didn't they? I mean, this is 2,000 years before Jesus was born and came to this world as a man, and before he went to the cross. And this is a type, this is the most beautiful type of all the Scripture in the Old Testament. Because here's the Father who loved his Son, and here's his Son carrying the wood on his back, going up the hill, that 2,000 years later, that Jesus would go up with a cross on his back. So he took his son, took the fire in his hand and the knife, and they both went up together. Look at this. And Isaac, now, Abraham had not told Isaac what was going on yet. Abraham had not said, Isaac, God told me to take you up to the mountain and kill you. Come on, we've got to go up here a few days. No, they just go on a trip. He doesn't know. Isaac trusts his dad. And Isaac spake unto Abraham his father and said, My father. And he said, Here I am, my son. And he said, Behold, the fire and the wood. Okay, we got all this. But where's the lamb for the offering? See, Isaac knew the thing. Abraham has been doing this at home. Abraham has been sacrificing at home the little lambs. He's been obedient to God and sacrificing these things. Now here's what Abraham said. Abraham said, My son, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering. So they both of them together. God's going to take care of it, Isaac. Now notice that I put that in blue. God will provide himself. It's in the typology and in the way of the Father here, this is taken two ways. God will provide himself a lamb. Namely, number one, he will provide a lamb for himself, or he will provide himself for the lamb. And you know which one's true? They're both. God the Father provided his Son, he was God, and God provided a lamb for the world, which was his Son. So it was sort of a dual type of a theological type here. They came to the place which God had told them that when Abraham built an altar, they laid the wood in order and bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar upon the wood. Now this is the point here now. Isaac's thinking, this don't look good. I'm the one I'm on the altar. Isaac, and here's his son. He could have fought him off, and he could have ran down the hill and like a wild person. My dad's went crazy, he's trying to kill me, running through the camp. And he just simply allows his father to put him upon that altar. What an amazing picture of the obedient son, isn't it? Jesus could have come off that, he could have come away from that cross when they were trying to nail him there. He could have called his angels, he could have spoke, and the world would have rumbled with earthquakes. And he let, just like Isaac, who let his father tie him to the altar, Jesus laid there and let his enemy put his nails into his hand. Because in reality, it wasn't the Romans who was putting Jesus upon the cross, it was the Father who was putting Jesus upon the cross. Isaiah 53 makes that clear. It says it was the Father who was well pleased. It was the Father that permitted that. He was just using the hands of the Roman soldiers as his instrument to do that. And look at this. Abraham stretched forth his hand and took the knife to slay his son. Now look at that. And here's what God sees. God sees the knife in his hand. He sees it above his head. And God says, okay, I know the heart of Abraham. Now, did God know that he was going to do this before it happened? Well, I think so, because God is sovereign. God didn't know, I don't know whether Abraham could do this or not. God knew that, but there's something about, even though God knew it, it would not have been beneficial for the faith of Abraham until it actually took place. Now, God knew it. Abraham had to go through it to experience this thing of faith and trusting God. We're talking about trials. God knows what the outcome of trials are going to be, but he still allows us to go through it in order that we learn the experience of it. And Abraham was going to learn something here today. And the angel of the Lord called unto him and out of heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here am I. Shoo, I answered that quick. The sweat was up on his head. And God said, he said, Lay not thine hand upon the lad, neither do thou this thing upon him. For I know that thou fearest God, seeing thou hast not withheld thy son, thy only son, from me. Now look at this next thing. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in a thicket by his horn. This ram, a male lamb. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered him up for the burnt offering instead of his son. Now look at this next verse. This is very important. And Abraham called the name of that place Jehovah-Jireh, as said this day in the mount of the Lord as it has been seen. You know, Jehovah-Jireh means the Lord will provide. The Lord will provide. Now, this is a, you know, Abraham was in this situation. What am I going to do? If I trust God, I'm going to kill my son. If I don't kill my son, I'm going to get out of the will of God. I'm going to suffer that. Do I kill my son and suffer, or don't do it and suffer? And so Abraham was in this predicament that, well, what was going to happen? How am I going to get through it? What's God going to do? Is he going to raise up his son when he kills him so he could go on? Is he going to do something greater? Or is it, what's going on? And here's what the thing is. When we're obedient to God, we're obedient to him, whether we understand how God's going to take care of it or not. At the same time that Abraham was going up the mountain to take his son, God brought a ram up the other side to get caught in a thicket. How many times does that happen, wonder? How many times does a lamb, because of his horns, get caught in a thicket? I don't know. I've never seen, very seldom, once in a while a deer would get stuck in a fence or something, but you very seldom see something get stuck in a bush. So this was not just an accident that this ram was up here, stuck in a thicket, so that Abraham could just go over and take it. What was it? While Abraham was being obedient, going up one side of the mountain, God was bringing the answer up the other side of the mountain. And in his obedience, they met. And all was solved. Abraham proved to God his love for him. God proved to Abraham his provisions. What a great chapter, what a great thing to learn from in this chapter number 22. Let me just go through this, a few things here that describes the similarities between Abraham the father and God the Father. Both had a beloved son. Both sons were miraculously born. Both had sons who were willing to be sacrificed. Both offered up their sons on the same spot. Both received their sons back with great joy. And both made preparations for their sons' weddings. Because after we get through here a little bit, you're going to find out where, Isaac is one of these pictures that he doesn't, he's not like the main character, but he had some great typology. Because here we see him the type of Christ who died. And then we're going to see later this is sort of the type of the bridegroom. He's going to get later on married to Rebecca. And many people believe that's sort of a picture of the church being the bride and Christ being the bridegroom. The Father provided it. And just like the Heavenly Father is providing a bride for the church, we're the bride. Christ is the groom, and he's going to bring us together. So those are the similarities we see in the story. There's we see the typology of Isaac being like a picture of Christ. Abraham being a picture of the Father. Abraham was you see from this place on, it seems like his faith grew and was strong. And, the book of Hebrews, when you read Hebrews 11, as we've studied there last year in our study, Abraham had a great faith in God and the coming city of heaven, the city of God, and he was a man of great faith. He's one of the great men of faith of the Bible. And so this chapter here is an important chapter because in it we see God tests us sometimes to see what we really love the most. This son Isaac was important, but it shows us, even us, we parents, we love our children, but we need to love God above them. We need to love God above them. We need to understand that when God asks us something, He'll take care of the details, although we don't understand it. God will bring us through with His Jehovah Jireh way. We'll understand that God has a purpose in these things. And Abraham could always know that God will provide. I think God would always know that Abraham would always be faithful. And that's all in chapter 22, and one of the great, great chapters of the Bible, as we see a picture of the Son and the Father, a picture of the future sacrifice of Christ, the future work of His Son in this passage. What a great Bible passage. What a great chapter of the Bible, and I know it'll be a blessing to you, hopefully even more in greater ways we went through it. And we're going to cut that off here tonight on this chapter. We'll pick up some more the following time.